Are the United States and Saudi Arabia done with each other? This partnership was pretty straightforward. The US needed oil and Saudi needed more money and arms. But now? While Saudi Arabia's crown prince has been strengthening relationships with Eastern counterparts, Biden's approval ratings have now fallen to an all-time low.
Prices surging more than they have in 30 years, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight.
Gas prices, they're killing us.
And now it's important to analyze how Biden's not-so-successful talks with Saudi Arabia affect this partnership. But most importantly, who stands to lose the most if this partnership falls through? The United States or Saudi Arabia? So it was the 9th of July when the world went nuts after this article came out. This is Biden's piece in the Washington Post on why he was going to Saudi Arabia. And this was a big deal. This was his first presidential trip to the Middle East since he came to power in January of last year. In this article, he goes on about the things that his administration has achieved, but he also addresses his three main reasons for this visit: to counter Russia's aggression, to outcompete China, and to work for stability in the Middle East. I'll get to these points in a bit, but there's one important thing that he mentions. He said that his intention has always been to reorient and never rupture the relationship the US has with Saudi Arabia. But this journey hasn't always been smooth for Biden.
I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
While the relationship between the present leaders has been rocky, these two countries have shared history that dates back 80 years. The US recognized Saudi Arabia in 1931. After discovering that Saudi Arabia had a lot of oil, they shook hands over a partnership that revolved around security and oil in 1945. Finally, in 1951, both countries opened up the way for the US arms sale through a mutual defense assistance agreement. And since then, a whole lot of stuff has gone down.
Understand that a plane.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking.
But it's mainly been about oil and defense. Now, these reasons that enable them to continue their partnership have weakened. I'll start with the elephant in the room, oil. The US has been reliant on Saudi's oil since the 1970s. Although Saudi Arabia stands fourth in line when it comes to the countries from where the US imports its oil, it's still significant. In 2021, the US imported over 8 million barrels of crude oil and petrol products every day. Of this, 430,000 barrels were from Saudi Arabia. When it comes to consumption versus production, not only is the US the largest consumer of oil, it's in fact the largest producer of oil as well. So there's one argument that critics and some politicians have put forth, which is that the US can in fact become self-sufficient in a few years. If not that, it can at least no longer depend on Saudi for oil.
We are independent and we do not need Middle East oil.
But it isn't that simple. It's dependent on chemistry and economics.
Yes, science!
Firstly, there are different types of crude oil available that range from very light to very heavy depending on its density and its sulfur content. So they're not all the same and meet requirements differently. Secondly, foreign oil is less expensive due to low extraction costs. What I'm trying to say is a barrel of oil extracted in Texas isn't the same barrel extracted in Saudi Arabia. So it makes sense for the US to continue importing crude oil from Saudi whilst maintaining higher export prices for oil produced at home. And guess what? Saudi Arabia follows the same strategy for local power generation, and so does Russia. With fuel oil, for instance, Saudi Arabia imported 48,000 barrels per day between April and June this year, nearly double of what it imported in its same period last year. Ever since Europe and the US imposed sanctions on Russia due to its invasion of Ukraine, it has been forced to find alternatives. And one of its promising options was Saudi Arabia. Remember when I said that one of Biden's motivations was to counter Russia's aggressions? Well, this is one of them. Unfortunately for Biden though, he can't do much about this. It's controlled by OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Created in 1960, the ultimate goal of this alliance was to protect the interest of crude exporters of the Middle East against the US, who at the time dominated the market and fixed the rates. In 2016, Russia, along with a few others, joined OPEC as OPEC Plus to coordinate crude oil supply. Both US and OPEC compete for global market share. And when prices hit 139 USD per barrel in March of 2022, since an all-time high of 2008, Biden took notice. During his visit, Biden hoped to reach a deal with the Saudis that would allow for an increase in their oil production to help drive down gasoline prices back in the States. And that's exactly what they sat down to discuss at the OPEC meeting on August 3rd. In the meeting, of course, they agreed to increase the output goal by 100,000 barrels per day. It may sound like a lot, but it's only 0.1% of the global demand. Okay, let me fuel up. Anyway, back to it. By now, Saudi Arabia realized that a partnership with Russia for oil gave Saudi Arabia better control over the global market. So it extended a similar partnership to China. Not for oil, but for defense. And boy, does that piss off the US. It has been the #1 supplier of arms for Saudi Arabia for as long as both countries can remember. But now things are changing. Since 2016, Saudi has been purchasing drones from China, its largest trade partner. One of the reasons it is doing so is because of the US's strict export controls. To meet the growing competition, the US even eased restrictions on exporting military-grade drones to foreign nations and suspended a $23 billion military deal when Saudi insisted on trade with China. But these actions haven't made much of an impact to stop China. And in 2021, news of Saudi Arabia manufacturing its own ballistic missiles with China's help shocked the world because everybody knew it purchased them from China, but for Saudi to now have the power to manufacture them on their home grounds, that's a game changer. Hopefully you now see why Biden mentioned that his goal was to outcompete China. Saudi's defense minister simply said that its ties to the US and China aren't mutually exclusive. Biden's hands are sort of tied here too. So was his trip a total bust? Not really. The final reason that took Biden on his trip is to bring about stability in the Middle East. This includes mending relationships between US's Middle Eastern allies who don't have a great relationship with each other. After months of presidential talks, Saudi Arabia agreed to open its airspace to all civilian carriers, including flights to and from Israel. The United States National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that this decision paves the way for a more integrated, stable, and secure Middle East, which according to the United States is vital for the security and prosperity of Israel and itself. The next major breakthrough for the two countries was when they decided that international peacekeepers, including US troops, will leave Saudi's Tyran Island in the Red Sea, where they've camped for over 40 years. Thirdly, the two nations agreed on the importance of stopping Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. And finally, the two leaders talked about Yemen. They decided to continue the UN-mediated truce in Yemen and translate it into a ceasefire. Biden guaranteed MBS that it was still committed to protecting Saudi Arabia from external attacks, particularly the ones backed by the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. You can see how the US is withdrawing from the region whilst also trying to maintain a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia. So what was the bottom line for this trip?
The bottom line is this trip is about, once again, positioning America in this region for the future. We are not going to leave a vacuum in the Middle East for Russia or China to fill.
But is he getting results though? Only time will tell, but Biden doesn't have much time. The midterm elections are set for November 8th. That's only 3 months away, and his approval ratings have never been worse. According to this, nearly 60% of the United States disapprove of their current president. Joe Biden's popularity has taken a hit due to a surge in inflation, which rose to a 40-year high in June. Russia's invasion of Ukraine drove fuel prices higher, and the COVID-19 pandemic hindering global supply chains are contributing factors that affected Biden's popularity. Still, he managed to push through a $740 billion package in an attempt to tackle climate, the deficit, and healthcare. This is a huge victory for the Democrats, but there's more that affects Biden's image. It starts with how he's dealing with the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In 2021, the Biden administration released an intelligence report that concluded that MBS approved the operation to capture and kill the Saudi journalist. When Biden met MBS this time, he said that he confronted him about it.
He basically said that he was not personally responsible for it. I indicated I thought he was.
Even though he placed sanctions and visa bans in response to the killing, he is called out by many for doing the bare minimum. And it isn't just about Jamal Khashoggi. On multiple accounts, Biden has condemned Saudi Arabia for its repeated violations of some of the most basic human rights. In fact, Biden went so far as to promise the people of the United States that he would make Saudi a pariah state. But that hasn't happened yet. Some groups, including his supporters, see Biden as a hypocrite, and he realizes it too. In the op-ed, he almost felt the need to justify himself, and he said, "I know that there are many who disagree with my decision to travel to Saudi Arabia. My views on human rights are clear and long-standing, and fundamental freedoms are always on the agenda," but he also talked about Russia, China, and stability with the Middle East. This means playing nice with Saudi Arabia, which is the exact opposite of what he said that he would do if he were elected president. But once in power, geopolitical realities have forced him to go back on his word and into the arms of leaders he once strongly criticized. We've dropped some important links on this topic in the description box below. In the meantime, one thing is for sure, the US-Saudi relationship will continue. Maybe not as strongly as it was in the past, but they're not giving up on each other anytime soon.